So because of the nature of this group, I have a lot of information in here, but my assumption is you guys have specific questions, and so I'm just going to go through the Regional Stormwater Management Program and green infrastructure, but I'm going to go fast and just interrupt me as we go along. All right? I'll just give a little introduction to the district in terms of the responsibilities of the Regional Sewer District, because I know you all, being the super geeks that we all are interested in these things. So the Regional Sewer District was formed by court order in 1972. So it's regionalism in action since the early 1970s. It's under Ohio Revised Code 6119, which allows judges to form multi-county agencies. And at the time, I don't know, Mayor, when the district was first formed, I think it was just in Cuyahoga County. There was no Summit County communities. Oh, no. The four were original members, which is what Judge Corney just decided. So maybe there were the four, Macedonia, whatever.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
Going back that far.
Right. But it was a Cuyahoga County judge that formed the district, and he told us to do four things, which were operate the big wastewater treatment plants, maintain the interceptor sewers, which are the large pipes that carry sanitary from the smaller local sewers and take it to the wastewater treatment plants. He also told us to solve the region's combined sewer overflow problem, which I'll talk about that in a minute, and then to do regional stormwater management. Yes?
I was just going to ask Kyle, was it formed partly because of just the recent, 1969, the fire on the Cuyahoga River and the Clean Water Act, and just that all that stuff was kind of out, in the public eye at that time?
Yeah, that was part of it. The other part of it is that the universe before the sewer district was formed was individual communities operating their own wastewater treatment plants, and they were, the pits. So there was connection bans. So imagine today if the sewer district were to say to Richfield Village, you can't have any more construction because we don't have any more capacity at the plant. So there were connection bans, there were building bans. So if you look at the map of the district, I'll get to a map in just a second. This is the basics. I call these the cocktail party facts. It hasn't yet worked for me at a cocktail party. I seem to clear the room. But these are the basics on the district. So formed by court order, we're a political subdivision, just like a school board or a library board. We have a 7-member board, 355 square miles, 62 communities, 1 million people, and 230 million gallons of sanitary a day. But if you look at the map, and this is the same map that you have, these are the borders of the district. But not all of Cuyahoga County's in. So the west side, Fairview Park, North Olmsted, Westlake Bay, Rocky River, Lakewood, they still go to the Rocky River plant. So Rocky River kept their plant and operates their plant. And then on the east side, Euclid still operates their own wastewater treatment plant. Both of those communities also have combined, and Lakewood, have combined sewer overflow problems. And the costs are getting to the point where it would make more sense for them to come into the regional district, because operating a wastewater treatment plant is expensive, and it's not to be done alone. It makes more sense. The real way to think about it is that wastewater is best done centralized and stormwater is best done decentralized. That's really the way to think about it. But for example, if you look at Strongsville, the reason we only serve a portion of Strongsville is because they had 3 wastewater treatment plants that they operated. They took 2 of them offline and came to us, and they have 1 more plant that they still operate. So that's the nature of what's going on there.
But Kyle, what about in terms of watersheds? Is there any?
Yeah, I'll get there.
Okay.
So here's a picture of the plants. It's great. Okay, now in terms of problems, there's 2 big problems. Obviously, there's stormwater and combined sewer overflow. But the stormwater problems are related to both the quantity and the quality of stormwater. So this is just an example of flooding and the impacts that it can have on infrastructure, transportation, commerce, and red trucks. That's major impact on trucks and vans. And then this is a recent example. This is Sheldon Road at the Middleburg Heights Brook Park border. At this point, this was just this February, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Sheldon Road is underwater. because Abrams Creek, which is a tributary to the Rocky River, has come up out of its banks and flooded that whole area. And this is what it looks like on a dry day. So this is Abram Creek, and this is Sheldon Road. And this bridge or culvert here is too low. And also the creek has been straightened within an inch of its little life. So, you know, you don't want to have right angles of your streams and your creeks. Never a good, of your streams and your streets. It's never, I like how this parking lot has more sinuosity than the stream channel does. There's more curves. But this is a county road, and this is a large stream, and you have two communities. So the question of solving this flooding problem would take years to work out. But the regional, we will just fix this in partnership with the county engineer and with those two communities. So under the Regional Stormwater Management Program, this problem would become our problem, and there's no finger pointing and working out special agreements and those kind of things that would have to happen. So that's just an example of a regional problem. But to me, the best example of why we need regional stormwater management is the story of the folks that live along Traymore Avenue in the city of Brooklyn. So this is Stickney Creek. It's a tributary to Big Creek. These are the roads, parcel lines, Traymore Avenue. This is Stickney Creek as it comes out of the city of Cleveland in a double-barreled culvert, which is not a natural occurrence. So it crosses the border, and this is the only open section of Stickney Creek. And these folks are just hammered by that creek. And the point to keep in mind is they did not create that situation in their backyard. So this is Stickney and those folks' backyards. And for those of you that are familiar with streams, you can tell that this is highly altered. The stream is constrained, it can't access its floodplain. So there's a lot of limitations on this stream. And in July '09, it went from this to this. It's the same stream, same yard, and completely it floods these people on a regular basis. So the point is, I think this is a very important point, there's nothing that they can do on their property to fix this. They can't limit the amount of water that's coming into them from the city of Cleveland, the city of Parma, and they did not build all that impervious surface upstream that created this high volume of flow. So this is really a problem that can only be fixed through a regional solution outside of the city of Brooklyn to do upstream detention and other things that would actually address this problem. So that's an example of the need for a regional program. This is Mill Creek, which is a tributary to the Cuyahoga, Garfield Heights, and that's Warner Road, which is a major road. And Mill Creek, at this point that you're seeing it in its watershed, is draining 9 communities. So 9 communities are contributing flow to this point. And again, the stream, this is a classic example of an urban stream because you see very low flow during dry weather. And when you have a rain event, all the impervious surface, everybody knows what impervious surface is, right? Hard surface, rooftops, driveways, it does not absorb runoff. All the impervious surface in those 9 communities shoots all the water there, and it just takes bites out of that stream bank and will eventually undercut the road. Again, that would be our problem to fix. Yes?
Excuse me, is that a broken pipe I see there?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean this is and you can see that in the lower part of the slide, it looks like a tree root, but that's the other side of that pipe, you know, broken and moving very fast. But again, Garfield Heights didn't create this problem. So it should, now Garfield Heights has created other problems. I'm not saying they're, you know, they're like some saints among all communities, but they didn't create this particular problem, but the cost of it would be all theirs. And then this, I think, is just a great example, and you guys will appreciate this. This is the same watershed. This is the Mill Creek watershed in 1905. And the point to keep in mind is all of these little tiny streams. So these are the communities of the Mill Creek watershed. You can see it starts in Beechwood, Highland Heights, North Randall, Maple Heights, Cleveland, coming into Garfield Heights, and then actually coming right where we are in Cuyahoga Heights and entering the Cuyahoga River. the thing to keep in mind is that all of those little streams are the relief valves for flooding and erosion. They attenuate stormwater upstream so that you don't concentrate flow in the main channels and cause flooding and erosion along its path. And we have systematically, our whole approach to development over the years has been to fill those little streams in. It's just what we did. And that's why you'll have streets like in Cleveland Heights, there's a street called Meadowbrook. Well, what do you think is under Meadowbrook? The Meadowbrook. So we filled in all these little streams, and then University Heights has no open channels. It's not because water doesn't flow in University Heights, it's because they're all in a pipe. So that's what we did. And now the Mill Creek drainage looks much more like this. And so that has really taken out the natural flood attenuation capacity, the natural floodplain management capacity in that watershed. And by and large, we did not replace that with stormwater functionality. The city of Beechwood has done some on-site stormwater management, but the development happened in all of those communities before we got wise or wiser to stormwater. So this just encapsulates that argument. Rivers, streams, floodplains, and open spaces are sinks for stormwater. They provide natural attenuation, so that's a large wetland complex in the lower slide, and a stream with its intact floodplain. It looks pretty, but it's really a functioning piece of infrastructure that's providing stormwater control. And so what we do is we replace that with the incredibly oversized parking lot. Have you guys heard, the parking lot that's built for the 100-year shopping event? You heard that, Beth? So that's that. And then we do our traditional subdivision, and you can see that we took that functioning landscape and tried to recreate the stormwater functionality with these little tiny ponds, which rarely function as designed and quite often just fill in with dirt and sediment. So you're not recreating that stormwater attenuation. So that's the basic problem. The thing I want you to get from that is the basic problem that has gotten us to this point that all of our communities have with stormwater management is that we have an increase in impervious surface, which causes the stormwater runoff, and the runoff causes the flooding and erosion. And this graphic shows us that there's only 3 places water can ever go, and there's nothing that we can do to change that. It can run off, it can evaporate, and it can infiltrate. And when we harden this surface, we basically foreclose one of the options. We take away the potential for infiltration, and we also, and this is very important, because we go from a biological landscape, a green landscape, to a hard landscape, we cut down on evapotranspiration. Does everybody know what evapotranspiration is? This is when plants take up water and then they evaporate it as a gas. And it's a big part of the water cycle and water management. So this change in the landscape, which is what we do, this is how we live, has caused the problems that we have. And now in the older communities, we have to go back and fix it. And in the newer communities, I'm sure Albert is familiar with this, and Jason and Mayor, is we've tried to build some of that functionality back into our subdivisions, but we never really get there. So that's the basics on the problems we have. And then of course, we centralize it. Go ahead.
Kyle, so maybe I'm jumping ahead of you again.
That's okay.
In terms of sort of the design practices of doing these things in cities, and I mean, is there any best practices that are being used? Or?
Yeah, there's some. The bottom line though is that the regulations drive best practice.
Okay.
And until we have a strong regulatory environment, and the regulatory environment has gotten stronger and the best practices have gotten better. But we still have this approach that we want to get stormwater off development sites as soon as possible. And really what we need to think about is ways that you can manage stormwater on your own site. And that's a shift in mindset.
So as we think about things like the sustainable, later topic, sustainable communities and some of this regional land use planning theme, there's an opportunity here to kind of start embedding some of this into a larger way of doing things.
Right, and the fundamental problem that we have is that people will go through their whole approval process before they even talk about stormwater management. And then the developer will say, I got no room, there's no room, I can't possibly, you know, and it's like, dude, you can make it work, but
Yeah.
stormwater management is actually an art. It's a design profession, and we have always left it to the end. So here's our watersheds. This is our boundary. It's actually not correct because we have Columbia Township. This is an older map. But you see the 4 big watersheds. This is the Rocky River drainage, the huge Cuyahoga drainage, the Chagrin over to the east, and then the very interesting Lake Erie direct tributaries. These are a series of very small watersheds that drain right to Lake Erie. So this is Dome Brook, Euclid Creek, Dugway, and then several streams that have a significant amount of sanitary flow in them and are just treated as sewers, which is something that we'll hopefully correct going forward. So those are the watersheds that span the 62 communities. And our regional system, which is what you see in that map, and I won't spend too much time on this, but under the Regional Stormwater Management Program, we will manage the large streams, pipes, and culverts. So it's a similar paradigm to what we have on the sanitary side, where we handle the big problems and the communities continue to handle the smaller problems. It's a little different though, because small stormwater problems lead to bigger stormwater problems. So it's more integrated, hopefully more integrated on the stormwater side. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk quickly about a little bit more about what we're going to do, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. What I'm talking about now is the Regional Stormwater Management Program that the district has begun and that we're litigating at the moment, and hopefully will get solved and started. But the basics of that is that we will fix problems that have been out there for a long time and prevent problems going forward. One of the key things is that we are able to plan on a whole watershed basis. So this is an example of a watershed which encompasses a little bit of Yellow Creek, Furnace Run, and Hemlock Creek. So it starts in Summit County and comes into Cuyahoga County. And we are able to look across the whole watershed as opposed to just being constrained to the community boundaries. And so that means if there's a problem in Brecksville and the best place for the solution is upstream in another community, we can do that. And this is not, we're not going to just march in there and start pushing people around. We'll do this through agreements and land purchases and stuff like that. Obviously, we'll do a lot of inspection and maintenance. You can see these are some of the infrastructure issues that we have in terms of crushed culverts and blocked culverts that cause the flooding problems that we have. That's a trash rack in Dugway Brook that's filled with debris. And this is a large wetland complex in the lower left, which is obviously filled with debris and is not serving its function. And then build projects across all of the 62 communities. So, and then this is just examples of some of the work we've already done. And this one, this is back on little old Stickney Creek. This poor guy tried to prevent erosion on his property through the washing machine approach to erosion control. And you can tell, this is just a mess on all levels and is not providing the functions that these streams are supposed to provide. So obviously these would be our problems to fix. And then going to your question about some of the best practices, these are things that the district has already funded. This is a bioretention strip at Wildwood State Park, which is one of the state parks by the lake. And you can see that the key thing here is that it's depressed and it's not curved. So the stormwater flows over the parking lot as a sheet and flows into this grassed area, and it's slowed down and is allowed to infiltrate. And that's the key thing. In a normal parking lot, this would all be bermed, right? And this would be mounded up. And you'd have to water this landscaping, as opposed to making landscaping function to do stormwater management. And then that's a 700-gallon cistern at the zoo, and it takes the water from the roof of that property and then runs it into a large rain garden complex on that property. So those are some of the on-site stormwater practices that we're talking about. Okay, now that's the program, and I don't know if there's any questions on the program.
In terms of, I know like we live in Solon and they're going through, they had a lot of flooding a few years ago, and
Yeah.
doing stuff. So they're working with you, collaborating with you in terms of how what they're doing kind of interacts with other efforts, or is that not required? How does that work?
Well, Solon is only a very small part of the sewer, only a very small part of Solon is in the regional sewer district.
Yes, I see that.
And because they operate their own plant. So I'll say two things about Solon. One is that they took sort of a traditional approach to stormwater management, which was figure out where things are flooding and increase pipe size to move that water out of my community as soon as possible, which is what we've done across our whole region. For some communities, stormwater management is going from a 15-inch pipe to a 30-inch pipe. And all that does is move the problem downstream. But Solon has also recognized that and has done a lot of watershed planning within its own community and tried to improve some of the stormwater basins, and actually has a higher standard on development than some other communities. So I would say Solon has probably done a pretty good job within its boundaries on looking at the watershed perspective for stormwater. But they haven't coordinated with us because we're sort of trying to catch up to them. Yeah.
So if a community like Solon, I think you said Strongsville, they have their own plants, and if they decided to become part of the region, does the regional sewer district just take over the operation of their plants?
We would, and so we're actually in discussions with Strongsville about that, and it would be a great thing. Quite often communities either have capital budgets or they have existing debt that makes it difficult from their perspective to come in, so there's all those issues that have to be worked out. The most recent communities to join the district is Moreland Hills, which has taken 2 small package plants offline and has come into the district as a full member, and that happened last year. But the only way a community can come into the district is through their own initiative. They have to vote and come in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just cruise through the stormwater fee on the assumption that that I'm not trying to convince you guys to pay your bills, right? That you'll pay your storm. Well, whoever would have to pay the stormwater fee would pay the stormwater fee. I just don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but it is interesting. So this is a new fee, which is based on the amount of impervious surface on a property. So the basics is that we've measured every home and every business, single-family residential, driveway, rooftop. We've measured all that. And non-single-family residential, this is a church, we've measured all that impervious surface. And across our whole service area, the average home has 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. And so that becomes what's called an equivalent residential unit, which under a stormwater utility is the billing unit. It's called an ERU. So under our program, one ERU is 3,000 square feet, and that's the basic math. So the way that works is on the residential side, it's tiered, and it goes from small homes to large homes. The most any individual resident can pay under our program is about $103 a year. Overall, this program will generate $38 million in revenue a year, the majority of which will go to construction, operation, and maintenance. But those are the rates on the residential side. And this is what it looks like. The blue here is the home's impervious surface. This is a small home in Brooklyn. Those folks are looking at $34 a year. This is a larger home in Mayfield Village. These folks are 3,000 square feet, so they're between the 2,000 and 4,000, and they're looking at $57 a year. That's the majority of us. And this is a larger home in Broadview Heights, and they're in the top tier at $103 a year. So that's the residential side. Non-single family residential, so that's everyone else, is billed at a unit of $4.75 per 3,000 square feet, or will be billed. And these are just a couple examples. I'm sorry, this was a presentation for the Ward 1 Ministerial Alliance. So there's a lot of churches. This is God's Tabernacle of Faith Church on Broadway Avenue. If anyone's a member, this is what you're looking at $513 a year. So the thing that you should get is that these fees are low. And they're low enough to be a menace, but not, a pain, but not high enough to constitute redoing your whole parking lot to get the maximum credit for, and reduce your fee, that kind of thing. There's some bigger ones. This is one of the larger ones. These folks are looking at about $2,000 or $2,100 a year. And the red outline there is the full extent of their lot. And in terms of the impervious surface measurement, the grassed area that you see around the church would not have been accounted in their impervious surface calculation. So those are just some of the examples, and this is one where they obviously own a couple lots. All right, so that's the fee. Any questions on the fee?
What percentage of that, or does it all go towards projects you're mandated to get involved in, or?
The thing about the stormwater fee is we're not mandated, well, we're mandated by the judge to do regional stormwater management, but there's no EPA or Ohio EPA or US EPA mandate on us. The mandate on us from US EPA is for the combined sewer overflow issue, which I'll get to in just a second. So regional stormwater management is something that we're mandated to do by the judge. And the projects, the $38 million will go to all the projects in our member communities, flooding problems, erosion problems, inspection, maintenance, kind of thing. Yes, ma'am.
So you talked about earlier about doing kind of a planning function.
Yeah.
And would it and be on a kind of watershed basis?
Yeah.
How detailed do you anticipate that kind of planning process to be?
Well, it'll be really detailed on the hydrologic components, the things that folks have not done to this point. So we'll have detailed hydrologic models of those watersheds, which has been the big missing thing. It's what's missing in, well, Solon actually did it with URS, but it's the missing thing, If I tweak this lever in Richfield, how does this impact Broadview Heights? And so that's, I think, what we bring to the table. What we'll need from everyone else are, city comprehensive plans, watershed action plans, TMDL studies, all that other stuff that's already done that talks about where folks want things to happen. I mean, the only thing that the district should be influencing is the way development happens, not the where, not the who, but the kind of on-site stormwater practices. So we will bring a new piece of information, which is the hydrology.
There's this kind of idea in this whole thing that your focus or responsibility is the regional stormwater features
Right.
somehow. And that kind of gives me the impression that your focus will be on that, but it has always left a question in my mind. How do you focus on those things without a more comprehensive understanding as to how the whole system functions? And then in addition to that is some sort of there ultimately it seems to me there have to be some kind of a balancing between trying to fix older problems and prevent the creation of new problems.
Right.
And in some ways, and this is premature but in some ways it seems like if there's too much focus on just trying to fix old problems, and could be a missed opportunity
Yeah.
to really focus on those areas where there is the natural infrastructure and the opportunity to protect it.
Yep.
So it's just an observation,
No,
I guess.
agree. I
but-
mean, prevention is cheaper than remediation. I'm with you 100%, and that's why we sponsor those WRSP land preservation projects in Summit County. So the wetlands in Hudson and the Tinkers Creek project, and we need to do more of that for sure.
There's one, of course, I'm more familiar with the Furnace Run water.
Right, right.
It's mostly Richfield, but there's one, just as an example, there's this about 120-acre area that's at the intersection of 271 and 77, the northeast quadrant, that has been in the process for approval of a residential development, that when I look out into the future in terms of the stormwater impact and the eventual demand of those residents to have sound walls created, if we really added up the cost into the future, it would be much cheaper to buy them out today than to allow that development to happen. But to muster all that research.
Well, have you talked to Trust for Public Land and Western Reserve Land Conservancy? I mean, those are the movers on land preservation.
Yes, the Trust for Public Land, yes, and asked them to contact, they did contact them. This developer was not, their expectation of value is just way out. So I did do those things, but that's in terms of the public investment ultimately and the impact. It's just so hard to muster all those resources looking into the future. If we could do a lot of things that would prevent costs in the future.
Right.
Enough, yeah.
No, and I think it's also important that if that developer knew his true cost. So if he knew how much, because I'm assuming there's wetlands on that property just by where it is. If he knew what it was actually going to cost him to get the permits, and if the stormwater standards were high enough that, for example, he had to capture and infiltrate on site, that would raise his development costs and change the math for him. But right now, he has a chunk of land at 2 highway intersections. So he's thinking, he's golden. So
Yeah.
I agree.
Too much detail at this point.
Jason?
The stormwater fees, those are brand new, right? And those have never been charged before.
No one has seen them.
Okay, and then, which I just think seeing, we come at it from a transportation perspective at AMATS, but I've been, I don't know, 3 or 4 different situations in the last year where I've gotten calls from places like Streetsboro, Springfield Township, et cetera, with like major stormwater problems. That I just think it definitely, I think it's great you guys are doing that. Like there is a need, I think, for some sort of because they're just the kind of problems you talked about a little bit earlier, like in Brooklyn, where people will call and it's like there's 4 or 5 jurisdictions involved. It might be ODOT's road, the Summit County engineers involved, and it's like they don't know who to turn to or to fix the problem. And then just the other question I had was the practice of charging fees to residents and non-residents for stormwater. Is that something that's gone on for a long time in other parts of the country? And I just wondered kind of like where our region, or at least the Cleveland region, fits in. Like, is that way behind the curve or kind of in the middle of it, or is this gearing up in other metro areas?
There's about 1,000 utilities across the country that have this impervious surface-based fee. Because the bottom line is it's a fee, not a tax. And if it's a fee, it has to be connected to a service, and you have to be able to get out of it, right? So that's where the credits are important, because people have to be able to say, I don't want your service. I don't want your stormwater management service. So I'm going to capture and infiltrate all the water on my property, and from your perspective, I should be a blank. So that's why we have a credit mechanism. But so there's about 1,000 of them. This concept of impervious surface as a meter, really, has been litigated, and in almost all cases except for St. Louis has stood up as a proper benefit. And the federal government actually just amended the Clean Water Act last year to say that a stormwater fee is in fact a fee, because certain portions of the federal government were refusing to pay their stormwater fees because they were saying it was a tax, and local governments can't tax the federal government.
Oh, for federal property?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they actually, there's an amendment to the Clean Water Act, which, I'm sure you guys didn't feel the earth shake under your shoes, that said a fee is a fee. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but it said impervious surface is a fee. So, and we are not on the cutting edge. Lake County has a fee, a stormwater utility. Broadview Heights actually has its own program. Summit County itself is looking at the similar impervious surface-based fee. So no, this is not new. The problem everybody runs into is they set the fees too low and the expectations too high. So like Lake County had $3 million a year and they told people they were gonna stop, the world from shifting, and they ran into a lot of problems.
Well, I'm not sure this is going to make sense or not, but listening to the comments Mike was making and the things that you're saying, I guess, in a sense, this is, if you think in terms of biomimicry and some of the issues we're walking into here in terms of regional planning of land use, I think, what you're seeing here and the issues you're seeing have so much, there's so much an analogy here in terms of, just look at the Mill Creek effect over time. It's kind of I think in 2 slides, in a lot of ways, a summary of the stuff we've been running into at the Land Use COP. So I'm just thinking and listening to what you're saying here, Kyle, and I think it gives some really powerful insights to the issues, some possible solutions, and some thoughts on how we can actually deal with these things in a bigger, long-term sort of process.
Right.
So maybe tease this kind of conversation up as we start talking about sustainable communities projects and all this other stuff heading at us. This is a really powerful presentation you're giving here, I thought.
Just to answer a little more on Jason's questions, Portage County has a utility.
That's right. I knew somebody, another county.
But it's not, interestingly, it is not linked to capitalization. So they are, and for political reasons, they had to start low with an agreement that it would increment up each year. Some of the municipalities in Summit County have a fee, and one, Talmadge, started high and actually lowered it, which I thought was almost totally unheard of. But my question was, in terms of planning, it would seem that a lot of the correction could be in updating stormwater, subdivision regulations.
Yeah.
And I know Summit counties are, and again, they're just townships. Here's what the county does. That they're pretty. My impression was fairly strong, but is it the preponderance of municipalities that have outdated subdivision regulations and that really need the improvement to help this situation out?
I think there's 2 components to these regulations that are missing. One is this concept of preliminary plan approval, coming in early, because you don't want to see these plans at the very end. You want to meet with the developer and talk about what he's thinking and say, listen, you have this category 3 wetland over there, we'd like you to avoid that, and we're willing to give you a couple more lots over here, that kind of back and forth, and having the flexibility to do that. So dialogue early, and then no one's codes talk about capturing and infiltrating on site, and that's really the gold standard for stormwater. So the codes that are in place now are simply detaining a volume and then releasing that volume. So you're still having the same net increase in flashy, high volume, shots into the water courses. So if that makes sense. So folks have updated their codes because of phase 2 compliance, but nobody has sort of this idea of, look, you have to capture and infiltrate the first 1 inch of rainfall that falls on your property, because it's difficult to do. So
There hasn't been enough green auditing, I guess is what you're saying.
right, and quite often the stormwater control structures that we do build, we quite often don't maintain. We take the septic tank approach, the set it and forget it kind of thing.
Homeowners association.
Yeah.
But Kyle,
Yes.
I want to talk about the R word in your name, regional. Actually, if you look at what all of us define as a region, you're a very small part of the region. So I wanted to ask, you've mentioned some comments about some cities such as Lakewood and River and Euclid have their own plans.
Yeah.
And they may or may not merge with you at some point in the future, and Summit County doing some things. But this seems to me to be an obvious issue. Eventually, there's going to be a much more regional approach to all this. So I wonder if you could comment on your peers throughout the region, going out to the Mahoney Valley, how that's taken care of, and how much all of you stay in touch, and if there's anything on a long-term, wish list, because water and watershed, there's pretty well-defined systems out there. And so you're one entity that can really do a regional approach on things.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is you got to play your game. You got to get started. So some of the criticism that has been of us is that we're not big enough, that we don't have enough. We don't have all of Cuyahoga County. We don't have all of the Cuyahoga watershed. That has been some of the criticism that's leveled at us. And of course, we'd like to have the whole Lake Erie Basin. We'd like to have the whole 1/3 of Ohio that drains to Lake Erie, or 2/3 or whatever. I think it's 1/3. But all we can do is operate within our legislative boundaries, and that's where we're getting started. And there's a lot of coordination. The engineers of every one of our member communities have sat with us and talked about the program. So at the technical level, and I would say the mayors through the Suburban Council of Governments that works with the sewer district, there's a lot of coordination. But we still have the issue of land use is community by community, and these stormwater codes are, they're as strong as they're going to get until Ohio EPA says they have to be stronger.
Do you really work much with your peers though throughout Northeast Ohio?
Oh,
You guys
yeah.
all kind of get together and try to jointly plan things?
Yeah.
Because you are contiguous?
Well, I don't know if jointly plan, but we all share best practices, and it's a pretty small community. But you still have a whole development community that's doing, cutting edge 19th century stormwater management. So there's a lot of work that has to be done.
And that's probably where, I think that's a parallel with a lot of our COP land use planning stuff, is there's a whole realm of, in the end, development occurs and is done by the private sector. And, probably no matter what a public entity does, short of being able to literally regulate everything the private sector does, like there is a big component of it that is individual private decisions on how land's developed.
No, we're getting into conversations, I don't want to shorten up your,
Yeah,
but
what
I can't control myself, so I have to say this.
Oh, okay.
And going along kind of with what Jason just triggered is, and I know not to pitch, the people at MAR, I thought one of the interesting things was, that there's a technology that, led to a private company being formed, jobs, and the whole shooting match to deal with the mercury issue that has been, I know it's been worked with the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. So there are opportunities here to do just what you were saying, Jason.
But Tony, why is the Northeast
Great.
Ohio Regional Sewer District interested in mercury? Because there's a regulation that tells us to get the mercury out of the water.
Absolutely.
I'm sure, you guys are
Absolutely.
fabulous, but we wouldn't give two craps about mercury unless, take that off. Unless, we very much care about mercury at the Regional Sewer District, but unless we were told, the regulation is what, there's no Mother Teresa's out there.
But it's a place where we've kind of come together to collaborate to
Yeah.
deal with the regulation, and it creates jobs and it creates, innovation and private sector things. So I'm listening to this conversation, there's probably other things like that come out of this
Well, the
that can
corollary-
create jobs, innovative ways of doing things.
The corollary on the stormwater side is that there's several young engineering firms, small engineering firms that have gotten the religion on stormwater management and are head and shoulders above the more traditional,
Yeah.
GPD, Chagrin Valley Engineering, Stephen Avancic and Associates, these guys are, particularly Chagrin Valley Engineering, and I don't know American, I think GPD, they do a lot of work in Summit County, they really get it.
So these are knowledge organizations
Yeah,
that are coming
exactly.
out of
This kind of discussion.
So there
Yeah.
you go.
All right, so I want to get to the green infrastructure part because I think it's pretty interesting. So there are credits. So these are ways that people can manage their stormwater and reduce the fee. And I'm not going to go through the details, but it's things like on the individual side, pervious pavements, that guy has a hose that's shooting water out onto that pavement surface and it's just being absorbed into that pavement surface. You can tell he's marveling at it, right? He's like, wow. And that's a rain garden and a big cistern. So and some of the other things are the traditional dry detention and retention basins. Remember that that's only doing a very small slice of stormwater management, and that's what we've always, in the last 50 years, that's what a lot of developments have, and it's only a small piece of the pie. And there's a bioretention cell, and if you look at the Summa Health Complex, I can't remember where that is, but they've done a fabulous parking lot with those bioretention cells. And then some other issues. This is I encourage everybody to take a trip out to Chagrin Falls. This is Craig Corse, who's a landscape architect and an engineer. This is his new building, which he built several years ago, and he did everything. This is the building, and this is his parking lot, which is all pervious pavers. He did this in partnership with Unilock. So the stormwater from the rooftop goes under the building and then pops up in this fire retention rain garden area. Everything soaks in on the parking lot, and this parking lot does not freeze in the winter because it's connected to the subsoil, which keeps it at a certain temperature. So there's no ice on the parking lot, and it's, you know, it's a wonderful place. And then he has a extended detention wetland complex that he built here. The reason he went to this level is because the only reason, this is actually in South Russell, that he got the permits to build this is because he dealt with an existing flooding problem that some of the neighbors were having. So South Russell is one of those communities, probably like Richfield, where if the neighbors don't want something to happen, they can be very aggressive. So Craig went above and beyond, and this site is actually monitored for stormwater runoff, and we run the samples here at this building. Our staff analyzes the samples, and we're having trouble getting samples because there's so little runoff. So that's just an example, and for the kind of development that this committee's talking about, which is new greenfield development, this is all available as options, as opposed to a highly urbanized area where you'd have to try to retrofit that kind of stuff in. So that's Craig's, yeah.
What's his name again?
Craig Corse, C-A-W-R-S, I think that's him. And he is a wonderful guy, and the thing that's nice about him is he's no greeny green. You know, he's a traditional engineer, and he can talk about this from a very nuts and bolts economic perspective.
Because this was innovative, were there any problems with the government, because of the neighbors, things that made it slide? But if there hadn't been those neighborly problems, would it, under the existing regulations, could it have been done anyways, or was there any changes that needed to be made?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Setting aside the neighbor issues, he could have just done traditional building, traditional asphalt parking lot, and then just a basin, you know, the basin with the chain link fence kind of thing, instead of that wetland complex. Does that make sense? Yeah. So he could have done that and met both the quality and the quantity under EPA permit. Okay. So that's it on the stormwater program. That's across the 62 communities. This is back to our service area map. And the point that I want to make is that whole service area that's in gray is separate stormwater and sanitary water. So there's two pipes in the ground, one carries stormwater and one carries sanitary. The area that's in the green, which is the older part of the region, some portions of East Cleveland, Cleveland Heights, but the majority is the city of Cleveland, is combined. So one pipe carries storm and sanitary. So there's a different regulatory scheme in that area from US EPA saying that you can't have combined sewer overflows to the environment. So we are trying to take some of the stormwater management principles and apply them in the combined sewer area to minimize costs and add value. So this is our service area again. This is the combined area. And this shows you, this is a zeroing in now on the city of Cleveland and the combined sewer area. These are the stream networks. This is Big Creek, Cuyahoga River, the Lake Erie Shore, Stone Brook, all the way up to Euclid Creek. And those red dots represent combined sewer overflow points. There's 126 points where in wet weather, a mixture of storm and sanitary water overflows directly to the environment untreated. And those points have to be controlled. And that's the Project Clean Lake, the $3 billion issue. Okay, so this is a schematic. I'm sure you guys already know this, but you have wastewater from industry and homes. You have storm drainage from the streets, and they run together. into a combined sewer, which at the time they were built, you know, was state of the art, cutting edge. And then they go in that regulator structure, either sends it to the plant where it's supposed to go for treatment and then discharge to the lake, or if there's too much flow, it overflows to the lake. And if it didn't overflow to the lake, where would it go? Into the basements, right, of those. So the overflows are the other option besides, some cities use basements as part of their storage structure. So that's basically the inside of a combined sewer. Regular flow, dry weather flow to the plant, and it gets too high and it just goes over the weir. It's not complicated. And it goes directly to the lake. And then this is the Edgewater outflow. And that opens about twice a year. It used to open 50 times a year. And out of that would come a mixture of sanitary and storm. And these are some of the outputs of combined sewage. It's pretty nasty stuff. And these are some of the numbers. In 1972, there was 9 billion gallons on a typical year. We have cut that down to 4.5 billion. And it took about $2 billion to get there. And now we have to get down below 1 billion. And that's the Project Clean Lake, the thing that the board just approved, and that has severely impacted our rates. And it will be a combination of gray infrastructure, which is traditional stormwater management infrastructure, so these large underground storage tunnels. We are scheduled to build 7 of these tunnels and then enhance the wastewater treatment plants. But we're trying to incorporate as much green above ground stormwater storage, because remember, the combined sewer overflow problem is just a stormwater problem. And if we can enhance stormwater management, we can potentially minimize the gray infrastructure. So this is the gray. This is inside the Mill Creek Tunnel. We rent this out for birthday parties and bachelor parties, stuff like that. And then this is the green in our consent decree. So this pie represents all of this is what we are scheduled to capture through gray infrastructure. And the remaining chunk is about 528 million gallons. We are mandated to get 44 million of that through green. So we're mandated to do that. And we have the option to cut into any of the gray with green over the next 25 years. That's the extent of the consent decree.
How long?
Wait, go ahead.
How long is it going to take you to build those 7 tunnels?
25 years. It's going to take 25 years to build those 7 tunnels, because you can't build more than 1 tunnel at once. I mean, it's a huge. Remember that, you see Ocean's 13 or whatever, where they're under Las Vegas and they've got the tunnel machine? You guys with me on that? You got the visual, Don Cheadle down there tunneling under Vegas? Well, that's, I mean, on a huge scale, that's what we have to do. And just to manage the contracts. I mean, we're building the Euclid Creek Tunnel now. It's a $187 million project. This is huge infrastructure, and you want to avoid it as much as possible. So 25 years is the extent of the consent decree. The last tunnel will go into construction in probably 18 years.
Where's Edgewater on that list? Because that's the one they all kind of show because it's in such an important spot.
Right, and that's the southerly, westerly side. I'm not sure when that one goes in, but the infrastructure investment that I showed already to go from the 9 billion to the 4.5 has taken, on the Edgewater, has taken it from 50 overflows a year down to 2. So that flap used to open all the time. And now it doesn't open unless there's a huge rain event. It opened once last year. Yeah.
Scott, did I read that right, that you dig those big new tunnels down 225 feet?
Yeah.
Well, that's into the bedrock.
Yeah, it's a bedrock, huge tunnel. And they're 28 feet.
And they go from where to where?
Well, it depends on their course. So for example, the Euclid Creek Tunnel on the west side, I don't have the schematic, actually goes from Bracknell, or it goes under the lake and ends up in Bracknell. So we're tunneling under Lake Erie. So they're huge. And the Doan Valley Tunnel, for example, will go the whole extent of like Rockefeller Park and those areas. Yeah.
Actually, my question is kind of related to that. You showed the stat with going from, I think, like 9 to 4.5 million gallons since 1972. Is that a combination of infrastructure improvements and just like demand type factor?
Approach to that, and we missed a lot of the green infrastructure opportunities. So everybody's talking about Cincinnati in terms of green infrastructure because they're doing this big Lick Run project. And what Lick Run is a stream in a pipe. And you know, they have a whole stream that comes in and mixes with their sanitary flow, and what they're doing is actually pulling that stream out. So they just have sanitary flow in the pipe. So it was infrastructure improvements along the way.
And as a follow-up, so I mean, I imagine that was hundreds of millions of dollars. Were some of those projects funded with federal funds? Or, you know, was the federal government making funds available at that time?
The stats I heard is that up until in the early days when we improved all the wastewater treatment plants, it was like 75 or 85% federal funding. There was all this federal funding available, and you know, around 1995 it just went away. So there's no significant federal money to speak of. So that's pretty bad. Okay, so we're in the middle of this green infrastructure study. So my point is we haven't gotten this, we haven't quite figured out our green infrastructure stuff yet, but we're doing a study. It's due to the EPA December of this year to find preliminary locations within the combined sewer area where we can pull stormwater out and not have this mixture of storm and sanitary. So very important to keep in mind that we're not talking about on-site management of sanitary water. These are not above ground cesspools. This is getting the stormwater before it mixes with the sanitary water so that you're dealing with the cheap stuff. And so we're at the point now where we've identified these priority bubbles, and you can see that they're on the east side. The majority of them are in the Cuyahoga Valley, and then they come up into the Big Creek. And these bubbles represent the portions of the city that have the highest potential for green infrastructure. And so now we are in the process of focusing into those bubbles. And these are just some examples of, that's the CSO number, and then the remaining overflow volume. And that's where we can get the 44 million that we're mandated to do. So what it looks like, just an example, which I think you all will find interesting. This is the Kinsman neighborhood, sometimes called Forgotten Triangle. It's the near east side of Cleveland. So here's Kinsman Road. This is Woodland Avenue, East 75th, East 79th. Does anyone know where they are? It's around Orlando Baking, Maselli's Cheese. You got it?
Yeah, I know that.
All right. There is so much focus right now on this neighborhood in terms of US EPA brownfields grants and HUD. This is CMHA's new headquarters. This is Garden Valley Estates, which just got redone. This is the Kingsbury Valley. And this is a stream channel in a pipe with sanitary sewage pumped into it. That's the old style. My point with this is that there's a lot of development activity going on here. You've got CMHA, you've got this Urban Agricultural Innovation Zone, which the Community Development Corporation is trying to assemble 28 acres to basically have an industrial park for urban ag. It's very interesting. And then Orlando Baking wants to expand, and Maselli's Cheese wants to expand. So there's a ton of action down here and a ton of desperation. I mean, this neighborhood is just sort of blown out. So we are looking at this as ways that we can partner on these development projects and integrate stormwater management into these projects and offload stormwater before it gets into the combined system. So I think I might have an example or two. These kind of measures, for example, on Maselli, you saw some of these pictures already, Maselli's and Orlando Baking, if they can manage their stormwater on site or temporarily detain their stormwater and then offload it to the Kingsbury Basin. So it's basically looking at this neighborhood, which developed to drain to the combined sewer system and trying to build stormwater management back in. That's green infrastructure as it relates to combined sewer overflow control. This is just an example. This is in Philadelphia. Yes, ma'am.
At whose cost?
The districts,
Okay.
100%, because it's permit compliance for us. So say for example, we go to Maselli's and we say, okay, you guys are going to expand. We want your whole parking lot to be pervious pavers. We pay the marginal, the delta between an asphalt parking lot and a fancy parking lot. This is Sailor Grove in Philly. It was, sort of a standard urban park, not doing much, and they took the stormwater from all of those streets and redirected it and then put in this landscape feature. And this was the day, the day after it was finalized, so it looks much better than this. And then this is Tanner Springs Park in Portland. These are all communities with combined sewer overflow issues. They built this urban water feature. So that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Yeah.
As you look at these projects, Kyle, how much is being learned while you're doing these things and then shared? I mean, are they actually creating sort of best practices as a result of doing this stuff that everybody can build off of?
It's amazing to me. The combined sewer overflow problem in our country has been solved by wastewater engineers. And it's not a wastewater problem, it's a stormwater problem.
Right.
So it's like, you sent a boy to do a man's job. I say that all the time at the districts. I say you sent a wastewater engineer to solve a stormwater problem, and I realize it's an insult, but it's the truth. If you're a wastewater engineer and you're told to solve a wastewater problem, what are you going to do? You're going to build a pipe, and you're going to send it to the plant. If you're a stormwater engineer and you're told to solve a stormwater problem, you're going to do this. And so it's a huge paradigm shift.
Innovation's coming out of that.
But nobody knows what they're doing, because you have a bunch of wastewater engineers who've never done any of the suburban stormwater management, so they all think this is new. Whereas, any of us would look at that and say that's an enhanced extended detention wetland.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like that those two professions are slowly and gradually kind of merging, correct? Isn't that
Well, through green infrastructure.
Right.
But there's a lot of distrust, because remember, if you can put water in a pipe and send it to a plant, you have no doubt about compliance, permit compliance. But if you're relying on on-site features, on private property, it's very scary to a permit holder.
But as they have these conversations, I'm just maybe jumping ahead on it a little bit, but are they trying to structure these conversations so that, what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing, how they're thinking about this stuff that's different is kind of being articulated? I'm just thinking there might be an opportunity here for us to influence the creation of that. We would call it the knowledge asset.
Right.
And, through sustainable communities, through the land use COP, kind of use those things as kind of a way of doing things, and then share that with other groups, like the treatment people, blah, blah,
Well, I
blah.
think at a micro scale, the more interesting thing is us in Akron. I mean, Akron has the same combined sewer overflow problem, and they have no green in their program.
Okay.
And
I thought they were programmed every way. This is not good.
Oh, we don't have anything to do with that.
Well, they did have some green, but it wasn't approved.
well, their whole program wasn't approved.
Right.
Yeah.
But they did have some.
Well, Kyle, was that partly why it wasn't, did that factor into why it wasn't approved, the green component?
No, as I understand, the reason it wasn't approved is because they have remaining overflows permitted in that consent decree. I think it may have been 4, I'm not sure. Like, we're permitted to have 2 or 3 remaining overflows. Down from 80 or 90 overflows a year at certain combined points. But the judge saw 4 overflows, and I think he runs along the towpath or something. I mean,
He lives in, the word is that he lives in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Right.
And he thought that even 4 was too many flowing into a national park.
One, it is an interesting dynamic, going back to the regional thing that we're always talking about. It's like if Akron puts a certain amount of sewage into the Cuyahoga River,
Right.
it still ends up becoming your problem.
Yeah.
you
Our
know,
board
because
members ask that all the time.
and it goes into Lake Erie.
Right.
So
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but the mayor of Cuyahoga Heights, where we are now, is on our board. And he brings that up. He's like, wait a minute, if Akron gets 4 and we're required to have 2 or 3, and we're doing all this green, we're mandated in the next 8 years to spend $42 million to get that 44 million gallons of green. And anything else, is up to us, but,
So it behooves you to be in touch with Akron and Summit because you're downhill, literally.
yes,
You've
Summit
gotta work
County
with
does
them.
drain into, yes, it does, and we are in touch. Akron and us work together because we're peers. And the Summit County communities, we have a lot of contact with them, so.
I wanted to ask you, since all of these things we discussed impact the developers so much, not just in Northeast Ohio, but just look at our region, what's the established channels that existing larger developers go through to find out about this? Is there somebody sort of on your staff that is targeted to interface with the developers, or some kind of a channel of outreach?
Yeah, that's something that we are working on now and need to do better. The sewer district, under our old leadership, took a very fly low approach, and we have a new director who's kind of a name in lights kind of guy, and that's a total shift for the district. So we have to get out there and do more outreach, because we also regulate development, and developers don't know that until they come to us, and it's a little late. So
they have to come to you at some point.
yeah, but we need to do a better job of telling people that they have to come to us.
Well, at what point do they have to come to you?
Well, they have to get, in the city of Cleveland only, we are not allowed to have any increase in CSO volume. And so they
this
need.
is really in the CSO kind of.
Yeah. We have regulatory authority, just like a city in the combined sewer area.
Right.
And unfortunately, the districts never advertise that. So developers sometimes will come to us asking for a permit, and they'll kind of get caught in a buzzsaw, which isn't fair to them.
Right.
So.
I say we could require that their headquarters be located inside of those new large pipes, which would be incentive for them to.
We need that space.
Oh, you need a space.
There's some extra space.
We're not building those tunnels on spec.
As long as you're doing them, you can throw in a subway down there too.
They have tenants.
Right. Yeah, we have tenants. That space is leased. So that's it. There's the websites for the 2 sites, but that is what's going on at the district.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was
Sure.
a fantastic, thought-provoking presentation.
Thanks, guys.
It was really interesting. I was whispering to Curtis over here. It's like we talk at an MPO about toiling in obscurity, and we deal with so much complexity with funding and projects, and the public doesn't, understandably isn't necessarily that interested in it until it's something that affects them. But thinking about what you guys do, it's so much more complicated, and it's so much more obscure, I think, to people, but it's so important, because I even use, I don't know if I said Alec when I was in your class, but, I'll use that example as it's like that with roads, but roads are so much more visible, but especially with sewers, no one ever thinks about it until they, flush their toilet and the water backs up into their house,
Right.
or, they try to drive down I-77 at Grand Avenue and see what you showed in that slide. So it's I'm sure the public outreach part of it has got to be really challenging. And then I know with the fees and everything, of course, then it's like you guys are always the bad guy, no matter what, probably. But
Yeah, the public has been pretty amazing. I would say by and large, I know, Mayor, you're at meetings in Summit County. The people get this. People don't like having to pay a new fee. They don't like that at all. And they don't like the corruption issues that have happened in Cuyahoga County. If I had a chance to talk to Jimmy DeMora, I would just point out to him how hard he has made everyone else's job. Because you're fighting uphill whenever you're a public official now. And not that I'm an official, but just to talk to people about money.
Trust.
The trust is, he took us back years. But by and large, I was in Moreland Hills last week, and the people in Moreland Hills are looking at a completely new paradigm. They're a sanitary customer of the district now, and now they're going to have this stormwater fee, and they thought they moved to the country. And they, one lady came in, the start of the presentation, she said, I'm very angry with you. And I said, okay, let's talk it through. And at the end, she goes, I'm still angry with you, but I'm okay. And I'm like, that's
I was gonna
fine.
suggest maybe we could stop, at this point, stop the taping, and then we can get into some of this other discussion.
That's fine.